Welcome back, everybody. Happy Tuesday. So glad that you are joining us as we continue our very unique series this week on apologetics, why we believe, right? Kind of reasoning and helping people to think about their faith, maybe at a little bit deeper of a level. We had a great conversation yesterday, kind of about thinking about your own story, defining the gospel. What does it mean to be a Christian? And then, how do we frame out our story when we have a conversation with someone. And so our question for today is a little deeper one. And but the question is, how have you communicated your faith to someone in the past? And that could be everything from like kind of I haven't to maybe you've invited somebody to church. That's kind of been your way to communicate your faith, or to let them know you go to church, and that's been the extent of it. Maybe you have communicated parts of your story, or you've had a bigger discussion, but it's kind of anywhere in that spectrum. Maybe a specific situation or scenario comes to mind. So how about for you, Lisa? Can you think of a time or a situation, or maybe a go-to way that you've communicated your faith to someone?
Yeah, for me, I use, I think, just my life in general, as a way just to kind of communicate, a little bit of it. Like, people know that I'm a Christian, people know that I work at a church, that kind of stuff. I've blogged a lot, and so I've written about my faith and my journey. So that's been part of how I've communicated. But I think within the context of important relationships with people that don't know Jesus, one of the things that I've used a lot is Catherine's story. So my youngest daughter was born completely healthy. And then the second night, the nurses came in and told me that something was wrong with her heart. They had called the cardiologist that was going to come and give us a consultation in the morning and start talking about surgeries and things like that. And it was just a shock to our system. And then the next morning, so we spent the night in the NICU with her. The next morning, the nurse wheels her in, and I was, I didn't have my glasses on, and I was freaking out. And so I'm like, get her out of here. Like, that is not my baby. My baby is sick. And they were like, no. Catherine is completely healthy. We watched her all night, and her numbers are perfect. And I mean, we've spent enough time in hospitals to know that healthcare professionals never use the word perfect. And so I like to share that story just as a way of how God showed up with Anthony and me that night. There was this overwhelming sense of peace that I don't know that I've ever experienced again. Just kind of resting in knowing that he was right there with us. And then just that there was healing that happened on the other side of that. Now, that is not everyone's story, but we both firmly believe that that is her story. And so then we talk also about, how we see God showing up in her life and things like that. So that is one of the way. So when we talk about the power of story, I think that's definitely something I wouldn't have wanted to have walked through, but it has opened up opportunities for me to share parts of my faith that maybe I wouldn't normally share in conversation.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. And I think in my life, kind of my personal story of my childhood and pretty difficult circumstances and, God allowing me to overcome some pretty massive stuff to do education that I really had no business doing. And then, being in ministry is usually a interesting segue for people. If they're like, what do you do? And you're like, you're a pastor. Like, we're talking about faith now. And so, I think there's a blessing in that. I also weirdly, for most of my life, have had a really deep passion for people who are in what I would consider to be false religions or cults. So when I lived in New York for 9 years, it was 45 minutes from where Mormonism was founded. And so I just developed like kind of this huge appetite to learn about Mormonism and then ways to have conversations. And so like I've watched Mormons meet Jesus in relationship. That's been incredible. And they don't knock on my door anymore. They figure out where I am and nobody ever comes and sees me. But every now and then I still get to sit down and talk with some Mormon missionaries. And I really consider it an honor, And so I think that's kind of a passion point for me as well. But I don't mind getting into the deeper weeds, but I think my story is an easy place to start. So, well, let's see what some folks watching maybe think, what's been a way that you've shared your story in the past, kind of your story of faith, or maybe just communicated that you have faith in general. Like I said, there is no right or wrong answer to this. It's just where you are. And it's why we're having this conversation, right? I think that for a long time, the church in the West, this church specifically in America, what we have done is we've basically made Christianity a spectator sport, where we put on a big show every week and you just get people to the show and we'll do the rest. But that is not the picture of the New Testament. And so, we hope that the experience that somebody could have in a service would help them find Jesus. The best way for that to work is for you to know somebody that's close to you physically, but far from the relationship that God died to provide, and have a conversation with them about faith heading into, through, and on the other side of a service. That's going to be the best possible way for there to be meaningful impact in their life. So anyway, let's see what folks have to say.
I would add to that. I would add too that oftentimes what I've found when people find out that I work at a church is it shuts the conversation down completely. So the assumption now is that I'm not a safe person. So although we were having a great conversation 10 minutes before, people don't always trust pastors. And so it can be a both and. And so that's why I think making sure that everyone feels confident in sharing their faith. Right. That is God's design, not just for a select number of people.
Well, and whether you're in ministry or you're somebody that's following Jesus in the real world, so to speak, like I think the moment somebody finds out that you're connected to church, usually you have to find a way to disarm them. And so I will usually say something like, hey, I'm a pastor, but like not one of those kinds. Like I'm a normal person. Just call me Phil. Like I'm married. I have kids. I screw up. I do stupid stuff. Like I am very normal. We're like Christians, but we're not jerks about it. Like how do you find a way to help people put their guard down? I think that's a good call out.
That's good.
Carol, good to see you. Glad you're with us. Carol sent me a really sweet note yesterday. That was very sweet. Thank you, Carol. Susie, good morning. I haven't been very good at sharing my faith in the past. Maybe this study will help me improve. That's certainly our hope. Pete, good morning. By being a friend that always helps for free, help with a move or do some manual labor and asking for nothing in return. That's awesome, man. Just let everybody keep that in mind. If you need help moving, Pete's your man. So. Pam, good morning. Good to see you. Carol, talking to my granddaughter about God, talking with my friends about God, volunteering at church. Yeah, Carol, I would imagine that it probably oozes out of in conversation with you pretty easily. We get to see that around here. It's amazing. Jackie, good morning. Because of all the deployments our family's been through, I've often asked, how are you managing all this by yourself? My answer is always God. Yeah, I would imagine that's a pretty amazing bridge, because what I know about like kind of military family and military family culture is that there's this kind of church activity layer that exists, but the difference between, hey, this is an activity in our life versus like this is an actual anchor point in my personal life, I would imagine would be a great springboard. Jeanette, praying for people and offering to pray for or with them, giving people cookies or other things with a card from my church, which includes in the name of love, no strings attached. That's awesome. Way to go. Yeah. Jeanette's another person that I'm like, yeah, I think this, like when we talk about kind of gift of evangelism, I just think there's not really a fear with you, Jeanette. Like when I watch you interact with people, you're all in. It's awesome. Pam, I use the story of God with us, and so comforting with, and in my husband's heart, to go peace and acceptance, a lifetime faith prayer of mine answered in this time. Nice. Liz, good morning. Good to see you. Ronald, good morning. My marriage is my testimony. I was ready to get divorced and I let God work in us to have the marriage I have today, raised 3 beautiful children and now 3 grandchildren. That's awesome, man. Awesome. That's amazing. Crystal, good morning. Good to see you. Dom, I've been strongly influenced by Bill Fay's How to Share Your Faith Without an Argument. God is always working to bring people to a point of decision. Then he taps us on the shoulder and asks us to share our stories. People can deny truth from the word, but they can't deny your story. Yeah, and that's what we talked about yesterday. That's why it's such an easy place to start in a conversation with people. It's not argumentative, and it's not imposing. You're not saying like, this has to be true for you. You're saying, hey, this is what God's done in my life. Like, I don't know what he could do in your life, but if my life's any evidence, maybe something. Jennifer, good morning. I don't think I'd do a good. Jennifer, weren't you supposed to be subbing today? Am I remembering right?
Yeah.
I thought you were subbing the rest of this week. I don't think I do a good job with this, especially here in Colorado, but I do try. I just invite people to do anything I can. Invite lots of teens to help at Lacuna, for anyone to attend church or special events. Tell them how we are involved in D Hills and how much we love it and how much it leads us in our daily lives. That sounds pretty good. I'm terrible at this. Boom. No, I think
this is all the things I do.
Yeah. I think there's a level of like shared involvement that I watch with you, Jennifer, not just with you, but with Brooke and your kids, and just the way that you're a natural includer. I think that can be such a powerful thing.
And I would say the way that, because I don't, when something comes easy to you, you don't understand that it's hard for other people, but the way that you can involve teenagers and have regular conversations and not feel intimidated by them, that is not normal for all people. So that right there, like the way that you can include teenagers, you're making a big difference.
Yeah. Ronald, also, I shared my faith with clients and worked with integrity always. That's amazing. We actually have somebody connected at our church whose dad has a terminal illness, and he's, big time, high power professional. And he's got a clock on his life. And he sent an email basically to all of his clients and coworkers and basically said, hey, I have this much time left. This is how much time I plan on working. I want to apologize because if you don't know that I'm a follower of Jesus, we never talked about it. It's because I just didn't bring it up, and I'm sorry. I would be more than happy to buy any one of you lunch or coffee and tell you what I believe and why I can have confidence in the middle of what I'm going through. And his son was telling me that literally he's had dozens of these conversations. And I'm just like, that's insane. That's crazy. God gives all of us different opportunities. And for him to be able to see the opportunity like that in a moment like this is ridiculous. Yep. Sarah, good morning. When I worked with older adult facilities, both as an activity assistant director and in my home business, I've shared how God has blessed us in spite of what we've gone through, like the fire that took everything, but what we had in storage. Vern drowning at the age of 5, and he had an angel tea party on the bottom of the pool. Wow, Vern in Iraq, just lots of different stories like that. And it helped them not only understand my life, but also I have sought to give God the glory through it all. That's awesome. Crystal, honestly, I don't do my story justice like that, at all. God continues to show up time and time again, but it is so uncomfortable talking to others about it. Always struggled with talking about this. So glad you're doing this study. Well, I think, Crystal, you do have just an insane story, where somebody that's going through what you're going through without faith, what does that look like versus what does your story continue to look like with faith? That's what a testimony is. And so hopefully yesterday was helpful. And maybe all of us, like just kind of reframing and considering again what the picture of our faith really looks like. Tina, good morning. Good to see you. Jeanette, not exactly an introvert. Yeah, that is true. That is true. That is true. Sharon, I am currently trying to help the ladies in my small. Sharon, have we heard from you before? This feels like a new name.
I don't think so.
If you're new, welcome. Glad to, maybe you've been watching for a while, just first time comment, or maybe you've commented when I haven't been on here because that's better. I don't know. But either way, we're glad you're here. I'm currently trying to help the ladies in my small group write their story. So it's down in writing and ready to share. That's awesome. And I would say if you write down your story, write it in 2 versions, right? Like write one version. If you have, it's called the elevator pitch. Like if you have 30 seconds with somebody and you just kind of read the room, like what does it look like for you to share your story in 30 seconds? And then what is a story that's longer, that's more conversational look like? I think sometimes we feel like we get put into a box because all of a sudden we know our story, but we don't have that much time with somebody. So, and oftentimes you'll share this 30-second version and then somebody will ask you for the rest of it because now they know you're not crazy. So Becky, good morning. I usually ask them if I can share something about my faith. I share that I've fallen in love with God, which usually surprises people who somewhat know me. They normally want to know how that happened. Unconditional love for me is my answer. Well, and I would imagine, Becky, for you, like watching somebody who's had a life go one direction for decades, right? And then to see like literally a left turn in your life, that's so powerful because there's just no, I mean, we all know people that are doing like multi-level marketing or, you know, New Year's resolution. Like we know people that do it for a few weeks or a few months, but to see like ongoing, sustained, real life change, in my opinion, Jesus is kind of the only way that it happens. And so it is very different. It feels way more real to people when they start to see that in others' lives. Jennifer, first hour off. So I get to show up late, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th seniors. Nice. That's cool. That's cool. I know that's a thing for me. I truly love teenagers. They are absolutely hilarious. Not everyone feels that way. I like high school students. Middle schoolers are hard for me. They're hard, but.
And I love me some middle school.
That's good.
They're so weird. And they just want to know, they just want you to listen. Right. And they want to know that you care and that you love them.
And I just want to look at them and be like, you know, you're really weird, right? But I've been told I can't do that. I'm not supposed to do this. So I don't do that.
No, you can't do that.
Yep. And I've almost got a middle schooler at home, and he is going to be on brand for all the middle school things. For sure.
Yes.
Megan, what's up? Good morning. Good to see you. Pam, interesting. My 30-second version with people has brought many suggesting I write a book. Hey, there you go. Tina, being completely vulnerable. I'm not in a place to share a faith story right now. I am in a struggle that is feeling never ending. I just need a break. I feel I'm barely holding a mustard seed. And honestly, Tina, I mean, you got to know your own life and your own circumstances. But I think sharing the story of our faith is not about sharing a finished story. It's not about, like we talked about this yesterday, it's not about a happily ever after. That's heaven. Like if your story ends with, we're good to go, everything's perfect, like you're probably not sharing a very honest version of your story. Hey, here's what's really still going on in my life. Here's where I'm really still feeling challenges with God. Here's where my faith is still really wrestling. That's okay. Like I think God would rather us be real and vulnerable with people than present something that's not true.
Right. And I heard someone say one time, if you're kind of wondering, should I share this or not? I'm still in the middle of something. He said, I share from my scars and not my open wounds. So he allows a little bit of healing to come in before he shares kind of what's going on.
Right. And I think
that was just good advice.
Yeah. I think there's also this nature of like, who are you talking to? Right.
Right. For sure.
Complete stranger, probably different than like close friend who probably knows this stuff, whether you've acknowledged it to them or not. So, and I think there's a lot of metaphors about that, right? I think it's Craig Groeschel that says people admire our strengths, but they learn from our weaknesses, you know, or I heard a phenomenal communicator years ago. I was with Steve Finkel and we were in Atlanta and they talked about how even Superman has his kryptonite. And like, if you don't tell people what that is for you, if you don't tell people where that is for you, like they just don't believe you, you know? So.
Well, Brene Brown, I mean, the queen of vulnerability. But even she says like, you know, there are things that you are vulnerable with because that is something that makes you relatable. It makes you real to people. Just like Phil said, read the room and know who you're talking to.
Yep, absolutely. All right. So just a reminder, a couple things. I don't see Debbie on here yet. But if you're here, Deb, tell us what we can bring from Marketplace so we can help with Four Roar stuff as we stock up this week. They had just an insane number of people last week that they were helping. So thanks to everybody that makes all that happen. If you missed yesterday, by the way, as we talked about story, you can find it on our YouTube page, which is linked here. We also have linked in this document a whole bunch of resources this week. So if any of this sparks something and you want to go dive into it, not only do we have resources kind of in general, I'm trying to drop in some resources that are specific to each day. And so you'll see a couple today. One is a book written by William Lane Craig, who's super smart. And a lot of his stuff, honestly, even I'm like, are we still reading English? But the book that I'm referencing here is a very readable book. And I'm using a lot of his source material in our discussion today on the resurrection. So, and then just a message series from Andy Stanley about kind of his shift from how do I think about faith. So hopefully that's helpful. Hey, look, Greg's here. What's up, Greg? Good to see you, buddy. Glad you're here. So anyway, hopefully that's been helpful for you. We are going to talk today about the foundation of our faith. The foundation of our faith is not the Bible. The foundation of our faith is the resurrection of Jesus. The Bible is the authority for our faith. The resurrection of Jesus is the foundation of our faith. And we'll talk about why that's an important distinction. But before we do, Lisa, would you pray for us?
Yep. God, I just thank you so much for this community and just the blessing that each and every person has been to me and to Phil. God, I just pray that as we continue to learn more about who you are, God, that you would help us to be bold and be brave and be confident. God, that we would learn and gain wisdom. And God, that we would be willing to kind of step out into something that might feel uncomfortable at the beginning, but to help our friends and our family and even strangers know and see you in our lives and through our stories. God, we love you and pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. All right. So we are going to dive into this conversation. Let me just initially say this. The reason that I create that distinction between the foundation of our faith as the resurrection and the authority for our faith being the Bible. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about the Bible. I'm a Bible person. Mm-hmm. I'm so thankful for the Bible. I believe that it's inspired, infallible, inerrant. We'll talk about all those things. I think that there's lots of reasons for us to continue to hold on to the Bible as God's authoritative word for our life. However, when we make the Bible to Biblia, when we make that the foundation for our faith, here's a couple problems. Number one, the Bible did not exist till the 4th century. So the Hebrew scriptures did, but they had largely moved kind of to the periphery, even inside of Jewish customs. They were using the Talmud, which was a commentary on it, and the interpretation of contemporary Jewish leaders. And they were using the Mishnah, which was a document that basically set up, it's called the fence. It was like, hey, we're going to set up even more rules outside the 600 plus commands. And so you had all that stuff working, and it was Christians in the first several centuries that were like, oh, wait, this Bible, the law and the prophets, there's something really powerful and unique. And we're a part of this like bigger movement. Let's make sure that we understand that within this other story. That's about the Old Covenant. That's why we call it the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, Old Agreement between God and mankind versus the New Testament, the New Covenant between God and mankind. And those letters were circulating, the gospel accounts were circulating. And over the course of the first few centuries, all of those things were being recognized by councils to say, hey, these are authoritative. God actually spoke from all of that. And so that's how the Bible gets formed. But the Bible exists, Christianity exists because of the resurrection, not the other way around. And so just for us to understand that, without the resurrection, there would be no Christianity and there would be no Bible. Mm-hmm. Period. Full stop. So I just think that's so important, because when you're having a conversation with someone and they're like, yeah, but like, I just don't know if I believe it. The resurrection is historically defendable. Like is there faith required to believe it? Of course. Like it's somebody that came back from the dead. Of course, but you don't have to turn your brain off to believe it. And there are enough pieces of evidence that create a ripple effect that should hopefully help you reinforce your faith, as well as maybe help you in conversations with others if this is a key area for them. And if somebody says to you, I just don't know if I can believe a global flood. I don't know if I can believe God stopped the sun. I don't know, like whatever miraculous thing, you can go, look, like, cool. I'm not like, well, here's what I'm saying. Jesus was an actual person that lived, died for you, and came back from the dead. That's where my faith is rooted. Like everything else is how God works that out in my life, including the Bible, including areas that need to change. But like, what does it look like to have an authoritative conversation with someone? I think it's around.
And it's a heady book, but Loving God with All Your Mind, I think is what it's called. J.P. Moreland is the author of it. But especially if you are a mind person, because we're supposed to engage our faith with both our mind and our heart. And the heart can't love what the mind doesn't know. So it's important to use our minds when we're engaging in discovery of faith, but also in faith conversations. It's just been a great book for me to kind of unpack some of those heady questions that we have in a logical way.
Yeah. Hey, did you see this conversation between Crystal and folks on here? Yes. I didn't see that till right now. Yes. Crystal, I think my problem is how awkward I am in sharing what I've gone through. Like I'm not throwing a pity party. I don't need sympathy from others. How do I talk about surviving without making others feel awkward? Like, or LOL, yes, I'm an awkward duck. And then Dom, Crystal, it's the people who have walked through the crucible on an issue who are the most convincing because they have authentically gone through something and can provide strength from the other side that people need. And then Crystal, you are not, nor have you ever been an awkward duck. You are so special. From the time I first met you, I have wanted to become a close friend. I can't wait till COVID is over and we can get together. I mean, Crystal, I've never felt like, I think this is probably something you put on you more than you realize. And I would say, I mean, even if you feel like the conversation is awkward, I would say what feels normal and natural in our moment, historically and culturally, is static, is nothing. And you don't want that. So like, man, share your story. It's good. And I think even if you feel like it's a little awkward to do it, my guess is once you kind of break the ice with people, you're going to see how powerfully God can use it. But good, look, go team. Go team taking care of that one. Amanda, by the way, what's up? Glad you're joining us from Georgia. Nice. And look, Buffy, the heart can't love what the mind doesn't know. A new favorite, Lisa-ism.
I don't think it's mine, but
Lisa-ism. I like that. Let's all have some of those. That's good. And then Lisa dropped in the link to the book right there. All right. So as we get started talking about the resurrection, here's what we mean. Just like yesterday, we defined terms. What do we mean by resurrection? We mean that Jesus, fully God, fully man, actually flesh and blood, died, literally was put in a tomb, dead, flatlined. And then on the third day, as it was predicted hundreds of years before his birth, came alive again, literally resurrected, left his burial clothes behind. An angel moved the rock out of the way, spent weeks with his disciples, as we'll talk about. So like, hey, do we think those were all visions? No. Do we think this was just like a spiritual resurrection? No. This was a bodily, physical resurrection. And it is the thing that changed the dynamic of the disciples for the rest of their lives. So just that's what we mean by resurrection. Oh,
and here's the deal. I mean, if Jesus hadn't been resurrected, if he hadn't been crucified, dead, and then resurrected, there would be nothing to separate Christianity from anything. Correct. Jesus would have just been a good man who did some good things and taught some good lessons.
Another moral teacher, right? Mm-hmm. For sure. All right. So they reference one of the most famous references about Jesus from the first century. This is just a few years after his death and resurrection. Is a Jewish historian named Josephus. And so there's a couple iterations of what he said. This is probably, in my opinion, the most faithful one to probably what he actually said. It says, at this time, there was a wise man called Jesus, and his conduct was good, and he was known to be virtuous. Many people among the Jews and the other nations became his disciples. Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die, but those who had become his disciples did not abandon his discipleship. They reported that he had appeared to them 3 days after his crucifixion and that he was alive. Accordingly, he was perhaps the Messiah, concerning whom the prophets have reported wonders. And the tribe of the Christians, so named after him, has not disappeared to this day. So like when we think about the Bible, like we think we're going to talk about this tomorrow. We think it's really important. We think it's true. We think it's authoritative. But there are also things that existed at, frankly, the idea that we have anything from the first or second centuries written down, if you know about items of antiquity, is kind of crazy. Like that there's literally anything that exists. But a lot of what we have revolves around the church, revolves around what Jesus did, because people knew, like, wait, what we're experiencing is extraordinary. What we're experiencing is worth documenting. There were so many more barriers to not only writing something down, but to that thing being preserved over time. And so I just wanted to give you kind of one thing here. This isn't Christian. This isn't disputed. This is just like hey, this thing, Jesus, like, this was not made up somewhere down the road. This was not manipulated hundreds of years later. This is a concurrent, extra biblical perspective that is shockingly similar to what we just saw. So,
and I think in Christian history, we hear Josephus's name a lot. He was not a Christian. He was a historian. And so I think it's just so important to remember that this is someone who's documenting history with really no other, like, he has no motivation behind what he's doing other than this was historical.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Carol, if you can only read one book about God, excluding the Bible, what would it be? That's a good question. I'm not sure I'm ready to answer that one, but I'm going to put a pin in it, Carol. I'm going to think about that question.
That's a good question.
All right. So then, so basically, like, hey, if the resurrection happened, sounds good. Awesome. Christianity exists. There are essentially some major objections to the resurrection that I want to spend the bulk of our time around today. Like, what do people say, right? Because obviously something happened. Like, how do we explain all of this? And so these are, I would say, the best, most durable theories about why Christians thought, or how Christianity got started, or whatever, in which Jesus actually didn't get raised again. So the first one is what's called the conspiracy theory. And so there's this reference, right? I think this is in Matthew. I don't know why I didn't include the reference. But it's this idea where the chief priests are looking around and they're watching what's happening. And they basically say, hey, tell people that his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. And if this comes to the governor's ears, we will satisfy him and keep him out of trouble. So they took the money and did as they were directed. And this story has been spread among the Jews to this day. So the idea being there's this conspiracy where it actually didn't happen, but his disciples went and basically just conjured the whole thing up. There are a number of different problems with it, but it's still a thing, right? Like, it's a thing you got to contend with. And so I would say the probably most authoritative person that refuted this idea was a guy named Eusebius in the 3rd century. And so he has like a bunch of work that he did, because that's when this came up. It didn't come up in the 1st century because everybody was still alive that saw Jesus. So it just wasn't a big argument. It was in the 2nd and 3rd century, as the Bible was being recognized, that you started to see people have these other theories about what would have happened, because the eyewitness accounts, those people had died, right? So that's when we see this get popularized. And Lisa is putting in the passage right now. See, I was right, Matthew. Look at that.
Look at you.
So here's some things from Eusebius that I think are helpful. One, the disciples wouldn't have died for the lie, right? Like, at some point, the people that are lying about this, they're not gonna like go to their death with the lie. It doesn't make any sense. At some point, it's like, hey, just refute your belief. Just refute your belief. Like, okay, never mind. You're not gonna. Many of them died gruesome deaths as martyrs. They would not have done that for a lie, for a conspiracy,
for a lie, or even for a movement. And this is one of the things that has just stood with me for the last couple of years, is they died for Jesus, for a person, for the man that had walked with them, not because he was a great man, but because he was who he said he was, because he was the Messiah, because he was the Son of God. That's why they were willing to sacrifice their lives and live really miserable lives up until their miserable death.
Right.
They were not living in the lap of luxury by any means. And it was because of Jesus, not because of a lie, not because of a movement, because
Right.
of a man.
Well, and that's the second point from Eusebius is the lie wouldn't help them. Like their life. Why do we lie? We lie because we want things to be easier, because we want comfort, because we want to escape consequence. This lie did the opposite of all that. I mean, it did not help their life circumstances. They weren't cashing checks. Like it was, hey, do you want to be despised? Do you want to be somebody that others are suspicious of, and then ultimately give your life as a martyr for Jesus, for something that you're lying about? Like, yeah, sign me up. And maybe, like, I don't know, maybe one of them, maybe Peter's like, I feel guilty enough about what I did, I guess I'll do. But like, you're not going to see all of them do that. And that's what we see. Like, other than Judas, they're all on board. The only one that wasn't martyred was John. And it's only because even after they tried to kill him, he didn't die. Right. And so then they sent him on this island, they banished him, and that's where he wrote the book of Revelation, right? So they would not have done those things for a lie. They just, it didn't
put their families in jeopardy too. I mean, we don't read a lot about their family lives, but we know for sure that Peter had a wife. Like their lives were in danger as well. Nobody does that for a lie.
Yep, absolutely. And then why would they simultaneously orchestrate the conspiracy and hold to the high moral value of Jesus, right? So like they were continuing to propagate the teachings of Jesus that were like, hey, this law of love, what do we do to care for people? What do we do to like, there's just no way that those things that would sit simultaneously. If they were going to lie about it, there would have been some compromise, especially because they were writing the accounts. Like it would have been pretty easy for them to just like twist this just a little bit for it to directly benefit them. But that is just not what we see. And so this simultaneous back and forth is a big deal. Dom says the other thing about this is, if it really was a conspiracy, they absolutely did not follow best practices of how to pull off the conspiracy. Number one, never talk about the conspiracy. And number two, keep the people who know about the conspiracy to an absolute minimum. You don't go appearing to hundreds of people afterwards if you're trying to keep the conspiracy alive. Yeah, and we're going to get to that for sure. And then a couple more on this one. Number four, the accounts of the New Testament are too soon after Jesus' life for this type of conspiracy or lie to actually work. So you have, to Dom's point, you have references, and we'll talk about Jesus' appearances in a minute. But you have references of a lot of people that were still alive when these accounts, they weren't necessarily recognized canonically. They weren't all put together in what we know of as the Bible till the 4th century. But you had gospel accounts. You had letters that Paul and others were circulating to churches in the 1st century, like just a couple decades from when Jesus' resurrection actually took place. So there would have been ways to fact check this. You would not have done it that way if it was a lie. And then lastly, the disciples actually changed from cowards running from the pain of societal rejection towards it for a lie. Like something happened. On Friday, Jesus is getting hung, and they are nowhere to be seen. Like they are denying him. They are piecing out. They're literally, when Jesus shows up, they're talking about going back to the work that they did before Jesus was there. That like they were not G to G. Like they were done. And something happened that turned them from a group of cowards on a Friday to the greatest, most incredible force for good that the world had ever seen on a Monday. And I don't think that was a conspiracy. Like that just wouldn't have made any sense. Like that if it was a conspiracy, they never would have run in the first place. If it was a conspiracy, they wouldn't have been thinking about going back to their normal life. If it was a conspiracy, they wouldn't have documented all that stuff. Right. So, all of that to say, I think the conspiracy theory, for those and a bunch more reasons, has a lot of holes in it.
Yeah. And I can't remember which book it's in, and it might be in multiple gospels, but at the end of some or one of the gospels, it talks about that they're hiding in a room and that they're scared. The disciples, they're hiding. Why? Well, Jesus was just killed, and the same people that killed him are looking for them. Like right. To see that, and then to jump into Acts 2, where we see Peter just like going nuts. And then the rest of Acts, we talked about it, the Acts of the disciples, like it was a complete heart change from Friday to
Right. And if you're doing it because you're getting like fame and money and prestige, maybe I get it. I don't know. But like they didn't get any of those things. And if you're doing it and like it doesn't get you killed, I sort of get it. But if it's like, hey, nobody likes you guys and you're gonna die for this, like I don't know.
And we see, like we talked about Stephen, was it last week, a couple weeks ago? They watched Stephen get stoned, killed for defending his faith. They scatter and take their faith with them. They're not going back into hiding. They are sharing who Jesus is, what he did. What did he do? He taught and he healed and he died and then rose from the dead, changed the world forever. And that story is too good to keep to themselves. So, I mean, yeah, conspiracy. You can see why people wanted that to be the case.
Right. Oh, for sure. I mean,
it doesn't make sense, but when you think about it, neither does that.
Right. Becky, this is a good point too. She says it also takes a lot of coordination to keep a large lie going for a long period of time. Usually the story starts to change because it's hard to remember what lies were told to whom. Eventually it falls apart. Absolutely. For sure. Yes. Yeah. All right. Then the next one we're going to look at for a few minutes is called the apparent death theory. Essentially, this idea is that Jesus only looked like he died, that he actually didn't die on the cross, that they pulled him off of the cross, put him in the tomb, and then like he basically recovered and then got out, spent time with his disciples. This is one of the ones that probably has the most holes in it, simply because the things that are being described, Jesus as a historic figure, Jesus actually being scourged, and Jesus actually being crucified, those aren't really even historically disputed. And so if you think about what scourging was, honestly, many people didn't even survive that. And so just the absolute trauma and pain, and I mean, I'm not going to you can go look it up if you want, but the torture devices that they were using, it was honestly for Jesus to go from getting scourged to having, at least in part, to carry his own cross down the road with the condition that his back would have been in, with the condition of his own dehydration and exhaustion and blood loss. It's amazing he even made it to the cross. A lot of people died before they ever got there. Then he gets on the cross, and there are just enough factors of the amount of time that he had spent on the cross, the amount of blood loss that he had experienced. And then this interesting little thing that gets thrown in there, that you have the heart sac getting punctured with a spear by a guard. And that was a way that they confirmed death, because it was sometimes difficult for them to identify whether or not someone on the cross had died or was just unconscious or whatever. So it was a way that they confirmed that person was dead. And so that all happened with Jesus. But even if you go, okay, somehow Jesus survives all that, he would have died, he would have bled out from whatever that was after he'd been wrapped up and put into a tomb. He wasn't receiving medical care. He was being treated with embalming stuff, right? And so all this is happening, and then he ends up he would have had to get out of all that stuff, get the rock away somehow, get to all of his disciples, and convince them that he wasn't like a sickly individual recovering from life-threatening injuries, but that he was the God of the universe, right? So that there's just so many issues, not to mention that approach would have made Jesus a liar, right? So he foretold his resurrection, not his getting better from crucifixion. And so all those layers just make this a very, very, you have to disbelieve and break apart the story so much that so many different things can't be true. But if you believe the story of the wrongful trial, wrongful conviction, brutal scourging, and then ultimate crucifixion, he did not recover from that. No one did.
Right.
And then, like I said, a physically recovering Jesus could not have convinced the disciples that he was the risen Messiah. I mean, if he was like, hey guys, anybody have a walker or a wheelchair I can use? I came back from the dead, but it's kind of a slow process. You know, like
Well, I mean, 3 days later, his wounds would have still been oozing.
right.
They wouldn't have been scars. So,
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. All right. So when we think about, Jackie here said, I think the slight variances in the gospel prove that it wasn't a conspiracy. Whenever people try to perpetuate a conspiracy, the stories sound exactly the same. Ask a cop. Yeah. I mean, that is definitely an aspect of when we look at the way that different gospel accounts are written. They're written in ways that include different stories. They're written in ways that include different details. Almost like they are all unique eyewitnesses telling their perspective. So we've gone through 2: conspiracy, apparent death theory. I know we're going fast because we're going to run out of time. I'm sorry. I warned you. The wrong tomb theory. This is an interesting theory that basically when they went to an empty tomb, it just wasn't Jesus' tomb. And so like, yeah, sure. An empty tomb. Great. But that came up honestly in the late 1800s. This was not anything near when Jesus actually was killed and then resurrected. And so it's interesting, you know, like if the reason I think that this didn't come up sooner is because it would have been really easy to check. And I am certain that people checked at the time. So, you know, problem number 1, the women that actually went to the empty tomb, which is a unique, like if you're going to do a conspiracy, by the way, you don't do this either because women's testimonies weren't valid in court at the time. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just telling you that that's the historic reality of the time.
right.
And so if you're trying to figure something up that will hold up in court, it wouldn't have been them. They show up to a tomb because they had actually helped put him there. Like they showed up, they had planned to return. So they were not approaching something for the first time. The angel appearing at the wrong tomb would be completely unbelievable and also a lie. Like you couldn't believe that part either then. So the entire thing's kind of breaking apart. The religious leaders of the day would have easily been able to confirm this by just going and finding Jesus' body. And people have been trying to find Jesus' body and Jesus' tomb for 2,000 years. So the grid search would not have been very wide in the first century for them to discover that this.
Right. And that's the thing. I mean, the religious leaders and even the Roman leaders,
right,
they would have squashed that immediately. And basically, they would have just kind of opened the tomb and been like, hey, here's your savior, still dead.
Right. Yep. 100%. And they would have like publicly shown it. I mean,
for sure.
Yeah, Dom said, sure, the wrong tomb is a possibility, but not a reasonable one. Can't imagine that after the hassle the Romans did to seal the tomb and post guards to ensure the body wouldn't be stolen, that their GPS units took them to the wrong tomb. Yeah, this was unique, right? If you'll remember, they get this from a rich man. They're borrowing his tomb, essentially. So this was a known place, a known location. There were guards out front. Like this was not just like, oh, which one is it? This was not like that. So wrong tomb theory probably doesn't hold a lot of weight. The legend theory, this is one that I would say if people have a more liberal view of the Bible is an easier view. I'll explain why that's the case, but basically is that there was never a tomb, there's never a guard, that all these things that we read about just kind of grew over time in the legend of Jesus, right? And so what we know of today just kind of grew. But the big problem right now, like if you take scholars at their word, and I'm not just talking about Christian scholars, I'm talking about secular scholars. Well, they may point to certain New Testament books and go, hey, this is a much later date than you think it is. There are definitely some New Testament books that they're like, yeah, this is probably like 40 something AD, like a decade after. And so there was no time for the legend to grow. And the descriptions that they have of who Jesus is, what he did, and what happened are so closely connected to what people believed at the time, to what secular historians like Josephus believed at the time, and to what other books of the Bible would ultimately contort at the same time, in the same way. It just doesn't make any sense, you know? And so when we think about that here, we have this incredible set of events written down, and then the eyewitnesses that existed at the time that were not describing small little versions. They were describing the full scale legend of Jesus. Like, it was already done. It was already cooked. We would see, if this was the case, we would see, even within the New Testament, we would see it kind of shifting of like, oh, here, maybe something happened. We're not really sure, to, ooh, something special happened, to Jesus came back from the dead. You would have seen some of that progression somewhere. And we see the opposite of it. We see how central all of it is. So,
well, and even just the way that Old Testament prophecies were fulfilled in his birth, life, and death. When you
right.
think about who was writing a lot of these accounts, or who Luke would have been interviewing for the Gospel of Luke and for the book of Acts, these were not learned people that had memorized the prophets like someone like Paul.
Right.
And so when you think about who we're talking about, like, they didn't know. All they knew is what they had seen or what they had heard. And so, I mean, when you think about the timeline of everything, Peter didn't have time to go learn all of the prophecies and then like make sure everything lined up with it.
Right.
He was just looking at Jesus and being like, oh man, there you are.
Yep. All right. So those are the biggies. Those are like the major objections to the resurrection, and just some initial feedback. Now, you could go read, I mean, there's whole books written about any single one of those. I would just say that most of the time, for a secular atheist that's making that argument, most of the time there are so many other places that they have also undercut, right? The Bible isn't true. It wasn't written early. All these guys are lying, but so much even of what you guys have talked about, of how even other biblical authors are agreeing with one another on these details, but not so in agreement like it would be this verbatim lie that they'd all transmitted to one another. Those are really valid arguments to be able to have in a conversation where you have a relationship. So anyway, Jackie, you probably already put this in the resources, but The Case for the Resurrection by Gary Habermas and Mike Licona talks about all these objections in great detail. I don't think I've put that in there. William Lane Craig does a great job with this. And I mean, it's an entire book about all of these and then really thoughtful responses. That's linked at the top. But if you want to link that in there, Jackie, I'm sure there'd be somebody that would appreciate that for sure.
For sure.
Main evidences for the resurrection. Number one, empty tomb of Jesus. They have been looking for literally 2,000 years. Hardcore looking for the tomb of Jesus, have not been able to find it. And what's hard, right, is that it was essentially this, at the time, a prominent tomb, but unmarked, because it was a temporary holding location for Jesus' body. It wasn't designed to be the place that he would be forever. That wasn't even how burial worked at the time. And so it's hard because they're like, which one of these empty tombs is where, but they're looking for like every dead body, every corpse they find. They're trying to find out, hey, could this have been him? And every now and then you'll hear like, oh, maybe we found whatever. And they never have in 2,000 years. That, to me, that Jesus is a historic figure. If somebody says to you, I don't think Jesus ever existed, that's a hard conversation, because it's like, well, is there anything that would change your mind about that? Like, because he is universally known as a historic person. He definitely existed. And the fact that we've never found his body, and at times where there would be lots of motivation, even within the first couple of years after he came back from the dead, and that they didn't, I'm not sure there's any stronger evidence than that.
And the Romans were famous for a lot of things, their roads for sure, but also for their historical accounts of things that were going on, especially legal proceedings. And so there is historical evidence of the person of Jesus.
Right. Yep.
In Roman writing.
Yep. All right. So then the appearances of Jesus to his disciples. We talked about the idea that this would be very difficult. If you were going to try to do a conspiracy, Jesus would have shown up to like the ladies and been like, hey, tell everybody I got to go. That's not what happens. He is around for weeks. He eats with them. He hangs out with them. He walks through walls. He does a bunch of Jesus-y stuff, a bunch of stuff that like a sick person that didn't quite die doesn't do. He ascends to heaven at the end. Like, there's a lot of stuff that's like, this is not just a normal guy. And so he shows up to Peter. He shows up to the 12. He shows up to the ladies that find him. At one point, Paul says he shows up to more than 500 people. And he says, if you're not sure of what I'm saying, just go talk to one of them. Like a whole bunch of people saw him. This isn't just me. He shows up to James, his baby brother, which I would I would pay money to see that first conversation,
Right.
because James, we don't have any evidence that James was a follower of Jesus as the Messiah during Jesus' earthly life. It was only after his resurrection when he's like, hey, what's up, bro? I'm back. Like that must have been incredible. And then James becomes James the Just, leads the church at Jerusalem, is ultimately martyred. Amazing, amazing story. That doesn't happen if James thinks this is just a conspiracy or a lot. Like he has there's no motivation, right? His appearance to all the apostles, and then ultimately the appearance to Paul, where you have somebody that is vehemently against this new movement, that believes he's on a righteous cause, and something in a moment changes him. I don't think that he was convinced of a lie. I think it's because he met Jesus face to face, which is what we saw. So
for sure. And I mean, you think about what James's story was in the Gospels, and it was, my brother is a crazy man, and actually, I don't really want much to do with you anymore anyway, because you're dragging the family name through the mud.
Yep. And then lastly, the Christian faith that we know of today did not get founded in the first 3 centuries because of the Bible, because they didn't have the Bible. It didn't exist. They had writings, right, that would eventually be collected and recognized as inspired, infallible, inerrant, and what we know today to be the Bible. But in the first few centuries, as we see the Bible growing at a pace that nobody had ever seen a movement grow like this before, it was growing out of a historic event, and that was that Jesus actually came back from the dead. So those are, in my opinion, the greatest evidences for the resurrection of Jesus.
Well, and I was flipping through my Bible because I just wanted to see, but all 4 gospel accounts have Jesus appearing to women. And we touched on it just briefly, but number one of these guys wouldn't have used women as any foundation for, hey, you should trust what I have to say here. But for all 4 of these accounts to use that, like it just wasn't what you would do, because women held no authority, and it was not a trustworthy thing to use. To have one person do it would have been weird. To have all 4 just doesn't even make sense unless it was true.
Right. Yep. So then I'm leaving you guys, we won't go through it today, but I'm leaving you guys with this passage you can go through on your own in 1 Corinthians 15. If you're like, hey, Phil, this feels a little crazy, where do you get this idea that the resurrection is the foundation of our faith? From the Apostle Paul. So in 1 Corinthians, basically he spends the entire chapter saying the resurrection of Jesus is our hope, period, right? Mm-hmm. Lisa's already gone through and blown. If in Christ we have hope in this life only, we are of all people to be most pitied. He's basically saying, hey, if Jesus didn't come back from the dead, game over. Like none of this matters. He doesn't have the power. He doesn't have the authority. He can't help us. But if he did, then when people die, I mean, it's an amazing way. It's an amazing way that people dying in the New Testament are described. They are not described as dying or passing away. They're described as falling asleep, because their idea was like, hey, we already saw Jesus come back from the dead, and he's saying he's going to wake all of us up again too. Like, we're just falling asleep, guys. We can trust him to resurrect us because he was resurrected. So, I mean, if you've never looked through this passage and you're like, is this really this big a deal of my faith? Like, is this really that central? Yes, absolutely. 100% yes. So just, take a look at it. It's hopefully helpful for you to maybe be able to think about how the resurrection shows up in your own personal journey with God. It is incredibly, incredibly important for us to understand the centrality of the resurrection. And I think at the same time to understand that if this is the foundation of our faith, man, what else have you been putting in that? Have you been putting religious activities in as the foundation of your faith? Have you been putting in, your ability to study the Bible as the foundation of your faith? Those are rocky foundations, right? We talked about this weeks ago on a weekend that Jesus is the cornerstone, right? And the life, ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus is what Paul was talking about in that situation as well. He himself is the foundation of our faith. So let's not forget that along the way. Awesome. All right, guys. Well, I know we've got some prayer requests getting dropped in. Feel free to drop more of those in there, and we will be praying for you. Would love to be able to do that as we finish up today. I also want to let you know that tomorrow we are going to talk about the Bible. And so we're going to talk about why, the foundation of our faith is the resurrection, but the authority for our faith is the scriptures. Why is that? What are the objections to it? I'm super passionate about this. The college I went to has Bible in the name. So I'm in on the Bible stuff. So hopefully you can join us. If not, it'll be available for you to check out. Jackie's got a quote for us from C.S. Lewis. I'm in. She says, to preach Christianity meant to the apostles primarily to preach the resurrection. The resurrection is the central theme in every Christian sermon reported in the Acts. The resurrection and its consequences were the gospel of good news, which the Christians brought. Totally agree. One of the reasons the gospel story is so compelling and relatable is how people's flaws are. Hey, we're going to talk about this tomorrow. I'm not even going to read this. I'm not. You're jumping ahead. You just save that for tomorrow. We're going to talk about that. That is 100% true. All right. I'm going to pray for us, and we're going to get you guys out of here. God, thank you so much. Thanks for today. Thank you that this faith that we have in you is not a faith that requires us to turn our brains off. It's not a faith that requires us to not think about archaeology or history or science. It's not a faith that is senseless, but God, it's a faith that makes sense. And I just pray that for those of us who are watching that are followers of you, that you would strengthen our faith in you, that our foundation would be your resurrection from the dead and the resurrection you promised to us because of it. God, we pray right now for somebody maybe that's stumbling on this, or maybe somebody that's having a conversation because of this, that you would prepare hearts to maybe be able to think about this differently. Maybe, God, they've walked away from faith for some wrong reasons, and they're going to think about it for different reasons now. God, I pray that you would be with our world right now. When we think about the division in our world and an election just a couple weeks away, would you walk with us, God? Would you walk with us as a people and remind us that none of this catches you off guard? None of this is a surprise. Would you be with our state and our community right now as we deal with a resurgence around COVID? Help people, God, that I know are tired and want to maybe take a step back from some of these things to continue to be diligent and faithful, God, it's so much. Pray for Greg as he heads back to Colorado tomorrow, God, that you would keep him safe in his return. Pray for Dom's sister, Joanne, to recover from her surgery. I don't remember. I think Carol had Sarah had a prayer request pretty early on here. Here we go. Pray for the lady named Sandy in Stitch and Serve who's been diagnosed with cancer, spread to her lungs, liver, and bones. God, would you be with her with these experimental treatments? Give her healing, God. For her husband, Jerry, and family, God, just give them peace, even as they pursue some things that feel probably really, really overwhelming. Thank you for this community, the way that they can encourage one another, even us. We really appreciate that, God. Thank you for the joy that it is to be able to come together with you like this. We love you. It's in Jesus' name. Amen. Hey, guys, thanks so much for joining us today. We will see